The cold bit with ferocious teeth as Cooper Calloway rode along the snow-covered trail, his breath forming clouds in the frigid Wyoming air of 1878. He'd seen many winters in his 32 years, but this one threatened to be the cruelest yet. The wind howled across the open plains, whipping snow into blinding sheets that made the 10-mile journey from Blackwater Ridge to his ranch nearly impossible to navigate. Cooper adjusted his worn leather gloves and pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders. His loyal stallion, Renegade, plodded steadily forward, the animal's powerful muscles working against the building snowdrifts. They were halfway home when Cooper noticed something unusual in the distance, a dark shape against the vast whiteness that shouldn't have been there. "Whoa, boy," Cooper murmured, squinting through the swirling snow. As they drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. It was a woman collapsed face down in the snow. Her cloak was nearly covered with white powder, suggesting she'd been there for some time. Cooper dismounted quickly, his boots sinking ankle-deep in the snow as he rushed to her side. Kneeling beside her, he gently turned her over, brushing snow from her face. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with delicate features now pale from the cold. Dark lashes rested against alabaster cheeks, and her lips had taken on a worrying bluish tint. "Miss, can you hear me?" Cooper asked urgently, tapping her cheek with gloved fingers. When she didn't respond, he pressed 2 fingers to her neck, relieved to find a pulse weak but present. Making a split-second decision, Cooper gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body chilled to the bone. He needed to get her warm and fast. His ranch was still 5 miles away, but it was the closest shelter he knew of. "Easy, Renegade," he soothed as he carefully mounted, cradling the woman against his chest. "We've got precious cargo now." The journey that followed tested every ounce of Cooper's endurance. The storm intensified, visibility dropping to mere feet in front of them. Renegade struggled through snowdrifts that sometimes reached his chest. Cooper kept the woman tucked inside his coat as much as possible, trying to share what body heat he could while keeping her secure. "Stay with me," he murmured to her, though she couldn't hear him. "Just stay with me." Mile after grueling mile, Cooper pushed forward, his muscles burning with exhaustion. The woman stirred occasionally, moaning softly, but never fully regained consciousness. Each time she moved, hope surged through him she was still fighting. After what seemed like an eternity, the outline of his ranch house appeared through the curtain of snow. Cooper had never been so grateful to see the sturdy log structure his father had built 15 years earlier. "We're here," he told the woman as Renegade trudged the final distance to the barn. "You're going to be all right now." With the last of his strength, Cooper dismounted, still holding her securely. He carried her swiftly to the house, kicking the door open with his boot. Inside, the embers of that morning's fire still glowed in the hearth. Cooper laid the woman gently on his bed before hurrying to stoke the fire back to life. As warmth slowly filled the one-room cabin, Cooper returned to her side. He removed her snow-soaked cloak and boots, replacing them with warm blankets. Her clothing was damp but not soaked through, so he left her dressed for modesty's sake, focusing instead on warming her hands and feet to prevent frostbite. "Come on," he urged, rubbing her hands between his. "Wake up for me." It was nearly an hour later when her eyelids finally fluttered open. Cooper was sitting beside the bed, heating water for tea, when he heard a soft gasp. He turned to find her staring at him with the most remarkable eyes he'd ever seen, a deep violet blue that reminded him of wildflowers in spring. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My ranch about 5 miles south of Blackwater Ridge," Cooper answered, moving to her side. "I found you collapsed in the snow. You're safe now." The woman tried to sit up but winced, falling back against the pillows. "Easy," Cooper cautioned. "You've been through quite an ordeal." "I'm Cooper Calloway." She looked at him with those extraordinary eyes, confusion giving way to gradual understanding. "Abigail," she replied. "Abigail Kendrick, you saved my life." Cooper shook his head modestly. "Any decent man would have done the same. How far did you carry me?" Abigail asked, her gaze moving around the cabin. "About 5 miles on horseback after finding you. You were already 5 miles out from town when I came across you." Abigail's eyes widened. 10 miles in this storm. You could have died." Cooper offered a small smile. "So could you. Seems we both got lucky today." As Abigail accepted a cup of hot tea from Cooper's hands, their fingers brushed briefly. Even in that fleeting moment, something passed between them, a spark that neither was prepared for. Cooper cleared his throat and moved away, busying himself with preparing a simple meal while Abigail sipped her tea. "What were you doing out there alone?" he asked finally, setting a bowl of stew on the small table near the bed. Abigail's expression clouded. "Running," she admitted after a long pause. "I was running away." Cooper didn't push, just nodded and helped her sit up enough to eat. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until the storm passes. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." "Thank you," Abigail said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Cooper met her gaze. "No debt between us, Miss Kendrick. Just get well." What neither of them realized in that moment was how those 10 miles through the snow would forever alter the course of both their lives. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping them together in the small cabin. As Abigail regained her strength, Cooper learned she was 27 years old and had been working as a schoolteacher in Blackwater Ridge for less than 6 months. She was educated, having attended a women's college in Boston, and had come west seeking independence after the death of her parents. "But why were you running?" Cooper finally asked on the second evening as they sat before the fire. Abigail stared into the flames, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The town's banker, Harold Weston, has been persistent in his attentions. When I refused his marriage proposal, he threatened to have me removed from my position at the school." She looked up at Cooper. "I built a life here, Mr. Calloway. Those children mean everything to me." "Cooper," he corrected gently. "And Weston has no authority to dismiss you. He sits on the school board and owns the mortgage on the schoolhouse," Abigail explained. "He made it quite clear that if I didn't accept his offer, he would ensure I couldn't teach anywhere in the territory." Cooper's jaw tightened. He knew Harold Weston well enough, a pompous, wealthy widower in his 50s who believed his money entitled him to whatever or whomever he wanted. "So you fled," Cooper concluded. "Without thinking clearly," Abigail admitted. "I took what money I had and started walking toward Rawlins. I thought I could catch the eastbound train. The storm came on faster than I expected." She shivered, though the cabin was warm. "If you hadn't found me." Cooper stood and added another log to the fire. "Well, you're safe now. We'll figure something out when the weather clears." By the third day, something had changed between them. Cooper found himself watching Abigail as she moved around his cabin. The way she smiled when she discovered his small collection of books, how she hummed softly while helping prepare their meals. For her part, Abigail noticed the gentleness in Cooper's calloused hands, the quiet intelligence behind his frontier practicality, and the respect with which he treated her. When the storm finally broke on the 4th morning, both felt an unexpected reluctance to see their time together end. "The road to town should be passable by tomorrow," Cooper said as they ate breakfast. "I can take you back then if you wish." Abigail set down her fork. "I can't go back to Blackwater Ridge, not yet." Cooper studied her face. "You can stay here until you figure things out." I can sleep in the barn." "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," Cooper interrupted. "Truth is, I could use the help around here. Winter's a quiet time for ranching, but there's still plenty to do." The gratitude in Abigail's eyes made something twist in Cooper's chest. "Thank you," she said simply. And so began an arrangement neither had anticipated. Abigail stayed on at Cooper's ranch, taking over the cooking and mending in exchange for her room and board. Cooper gave her his bed while he made do with a pallet near the hearth. They fell into an easy rhythm together, their days filled with shared tasks, and their evenings spent in conversation by the fire. Cooper had lived alone since his father's death 3 years earlier. At 32, he'd long ago resigned himself to bachelorhood, focusing instead on building the modest cattle ranch into something that could sustain him. Having Abigail in his home brought life to spaces that had grown too quiet. A week after her arrival, Cooper returned from checking his cattle to find the cabin transformed. Abigail had reorganized his meager belongings, hung curtains made from an old sheet, and somehow created a sense of home that had been missing for years. "I hope you don't mind," she said, watching his reaction nervously. "I needed something to occupy my hands." Cooper took in the changes, then looked at her with a slow smile. "It looks good, real good." The flush of pleasure on her cheeks stayed with him for hours afterward. As January gave way to February, Cooper began making regular trips to town for supplies, always returning with news for Abigail. Harold Weston had indeed reported her missing, positioning himself as the concerned suitor. The town had organized a brief search, but the winter weather had forced them to abandon it quickly. "He's convinced everyone you must have tried to leave the territory and perished in the storm," Cooper told her one evening, his expression grim. "Some folks are still hoping you'll turn up come spring thaw." Abigail sat quietly at this news, her hands folded in her lap. "The children must think I abandoned them." Cooper reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "We'll set things right, Abigail, when the time is right." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You're not alone in this," Cooper said firmly. "Not anymore." That night marked a turning point. The casual touches became more frequent, a hand at the small of her back as she passed, fingers brushing while passing dishes, shoulders touching as they read by the fire. Neither acknowledged the growing tension, the anticipation that hummed in the air between them. February brought a brief thaw, allowing Cooper to show Abigail more of his ranch. They rode together across his land, Cooper pointing out boundaries and sharing his hopes for expanding his herd come spring. "My father started with just 10 head of cattle," he explained as they sat atop a ridge overlooking the valley. "Now I've got nearly 100, not enough to compete with the big outfits, but enough to get by." "It's beautiful," Abigail said, taking in the snow-covered landscape. "I never imagined I'd find such peace out here in Wyoming territory." Cooper watched her, the way the winter sun caught in her dark hair, how her cheeks flushed with cold and exhilaration. "Neither did I," he said softly, though he wasn't looking at the land. When Abigail turned and caught his gaze, something shifted between them. For a moment, Cooper thought he might lean over and kiss her right there on the ridge. Instead, he cleared his throat and suggested they head back before the temperature dropped. That night, as they sat before the fire, Abigail suddenly asked, "Why did you never marry Cooper?" The question caught him off guard. He poked at the fire, buying time while he considered his answer. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Ranching doesn't leave much time for courting." "No one ever caught your eye in Blackwater Ridge?" Cooper shook his head. "Town women tend to want town men. Shopkeepers, bankers, men who come home every night with clean hands and steady income." "And what do ranch women want?" Abigail asked, her voice softer. Cooper looked up from the fire to find her watching him intently. "I wouldn't know," he answered honestly. "Haven't met many who were willing to take on this life." "It doesn't seem so bad to me," Abigail said, her gaze never leaving his. The air between them grew charged with unspoken possibilities. Cooper stood abruptly, mumbling something about checking on the horses, and fled to the frigid night air to collect himself. When he returned nearly an hour later, Abigail had retired to bed, the curtain sheet hung to divide the cabin drawn firmly closed. The following week brought another storm, this one dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the ranch. They were once again isolated, but this time the confinement felt different. Every shared space seemed smaller, every glance more meaningful. Cooper found himself inventing reasons to be outside, chopping extra firewood they didn't need, checking on the livestock more often than necessary. On the third night of the storm, Cooper was awakened by sounds of distress. He sat up quickly, realizing Abigail was in the throes of a nightmare. Without thinking, he crossed to her bed and sat beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. "Abigail," he called softly. "Abigail, wake up. You're dreaming." She startled awake, eyes wide with fear until they focused on his face. "Cooper," she gasped, then without warning, she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. Cooper froze for a moment before his arms came around her, holding her trembling body against his. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." "I was back in the snow," she whispered. "Alone and freezing, no one was coming for me." Cooper tightened his embrace. "I found you," he reminded her. "I'll always find you." The words slipped out before he could consider their weight, their promise. Abigail pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those extraordinary eyes now shimmering with tears. "Cooper," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a question he didn't know how to answer. Later, Cooper couldn't have said who moved first, only that suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with increasing urgency. Her hands slid up his chest to his shoulders, pulling him closer as his arms tightened around her waist. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the heat between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Cooper rested his forehead against hers. "Abigail," he began, uncertainty in his voice. She placed a finger against his lips. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered. "Just hold me." Cooper nodded, understanding what she was and wasn't asking. He slid under the covers beside her, drawing her back against his chest, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. They fit together perfectly, as though their bodies had been shaped for this very purpose. Abigail's hand covered his where it rested against her stomach, their fingers intertwining as they had that night at the table. "Good night, Cooper," she whispered into the darkness. "Good night, Abigail," he replied, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. For the first time in years, Cooper slept deeply and dreamlessly, the woman in his arms anchoring him to something he hadn't realized he'd been seeking. Morning brought shy smiles and careful movements around each other. Neither mentioned the previous night until Cooper was preparing to go check on the cattle. "Cooper," Abigail called as he reached for the door. When he turned, she crossed the room and stood before him, determination in her eyes. Rising onto her tiptoes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. "Be careful out there." Cooper's heart hammered in his chest. "I will," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. With the breaking of the storm came a new visitor to the ranch. Cooper was in the barn when he heard the sound of an approaching horse. Cautiously, he stepped outside, rifle in hand, only to recognize Sheriff Thomas Miller from Blackwater Ridge. "Cooper," the sheriff greeted, dismounting with a groan. "Miserable weather for traveling. What brings you all the way out here, Tom?" Cooper asked, careful to keep his expression neutral. The sheriff stamped his feet to restore circulation. "Looking for signs of our missing schoolteacher, Miss Kendrick. Harold Weston's offering a substantial reward for information." Cooper's grip tightened on his rifle. "You think she made it this far in that storm?" "Doubtful," Sheriff Miller admitted. "But Weston's insistent we keep looking." "Mind if I warm up before heading back?" Cooper hesitated, then nodded. "Come on in. Coffee's hot." His mind raced as he led the sheriff toward the cabin. Abigail was inside, and there was no time to warn her. Cooper opened the door, praying she'd somehow sense the danger and remain hidden. The cabin was empty, the curtain to the bedroom area drawn. Relief flooded through Cooper as he invited the sheriff to sit at the table. "Place looks different," Sheriff Miller commented, glancing around. "Tidier." Cooper poured coffee for them both. "Getting organized for spring," he said casually. The sheriff nodded, accepting the mug with gratitude. "Been meaning to ask, you planning to come to the Founders' Day dance next month?" "Might do you good to socialize a bit." "Hadn't thought about it," Cooper replied. "Been busy with the ranch." Sheriff Miller eyed him over the rim of his cup. "Weston's daughter's been asking after you, you know. Pretty girl, good family." Cooper forced a polite smile. "I appreciate the thought, Tom, but I'm not looking for a wife." The sheriff shrugged. "Man shouldn't be alone out here, Cooper. Gets to wearing on the mind after a while." After finishing his coffee and warming himself by the fire, Sheriff Miller took his leave, promising to return if he had more questions. Cooper watched him ride away before hurrying to the barn, where he found Abigail hidden in the hayloft, wrapped in his spare coat. "You heard him coming?" Cooper asked as he helped her down. Abigail nodded, brushing hay from her skirt. "I was hanging laundry out back when I saw him approaching. Didn't think it wise to be discovered." Cooper took her cold hands in his. "Weston's not giving up. He's got the whole town thinking you're either dead or in need of rescue." "What are we going to do?" Abigail asked, looking up at him with worry creasing her brow. Cooper squeezed her hands. "We're going to fight back. But first, we need to understand exactly what hold Weston has over the school board." That evening, as they sat at the table with paper and pencil, Cooper and Abigail began formulating a plan. Abigail wrote down everything she knew about the school's financial arrangements with Weston, while Cooper contributed what he'd heard in town about the banker's business practices. "If what you're saying is true," Cooper said slowly, "Weston's been charging the town excessive interest on the school mortgage interest that wasn't in the original agreement." Abigail nodded. "The school board members aren't businessmen. They trusted him to handle the financial aspects fairly." Cooper tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "We need proof, the original mortgage document and Weston's accounting of payments." "Those would be in his office at the bank," Abigail said, her expression falling. "We can't exactly walk in and ask for them." A slow smile spread across Cooper's face. "No, but I know someone who might help us. Judge Mason's clerk, Daniel Forrester. We were in the war together. He owes me a favor." The next day, Cooper rode to Blackwater Ridge with a carefully worded letter from Abigail to Daniel Forrester, explaining the situation and requesting his discreet assistance in reviewing the school's mortgage documents. While waiting for Forrester's response, Cooper and Abigail fell into a new rhythm in their shared life. The invisible barrier between them had dissolved the night of the storm. Now, gentle touches and stolen kisses punctuated their days. In the evenings, Cooper held Abigail in his arms before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books, sometimes simply talking about their hopes for the future. "I never expected to find this," Abigail confessed one night, her head resting against Cooper's chest as they reclined on his makeshift bed near the hearth. "When I came west, I was looking for independence, not—" "Not what?" Cooper prompted when she trailed off. Abigail lifted her head to meet his gaze. "Not love," she finished softly. Cooper's breath caught in his throat. Though the word had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks, hearing it aloud made it real in a way that both terrified and exhilarated him. "Abigail," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I'd find someone who would want this life, who would want me. But from the moment I saw you in that snow, something changed. It was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she leaned forward to kiss him, a kiss that conveyed all the longing and hope and fear they both carried. When they separated, Cooper cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped. "I love you," he said simply. "Whatever happens with Weston and the school, I want you to know that." "I love you too," Abigail whispered back. "More than I thought possible." The following week brought a response from Daniel Forrester, delivered by a trusted ranch hand from a neighboring property. The news was better than they dared hope. Forrester had found clear evidence of Weston's financial manipulation. Not only had he altered the terms of the school's mortgage without authorization, but he'd been doing the same with loans to several small businesses in town. "This is enough to ruin him," Cooper said as they read through Forrester's detailed letter. "Judge Mason is already preparing to open a formal investigation." Abigail clutched Cooper's hand. "Does this mean I can go back, clear my name?" "Soon," Cooper promised. Forrester suggests waiting until the judge has formally charged Weston. "Once that happens, it will be safe for you to return and tell your side of the story." As February turned to March, the snow began to retreat, and with it, their isolation. Cooper made more frequent trips to town, bringing back news of the brewing scandal. Harold Weston had gotten wind of the investigation and was growing increasingly desperate, threatening anyone who spoke against him. "He knows he's cornered," Cooper told Abigail after his latest visit to Blackwater Ridge. "Judge Mason expects to file formal charges within the week." Abigail had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months now. In that time, what had begun as a rescue had transformed into something neither had expected: a deep, abiding love and a vision of a shared future. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Cooper knew it was time to speak the thoughts that had been forming in his mind. "Abigail," he began, turning to face her, "these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been conventional, and I know you came here seeking independence, not attachment, but I can't imagine my life without you now." Abigail's eyes widened as Cooper took both her hands in his. "I'm not a wealthy man," he continued. "I can't offer you the life Weston could. But I can offer you a true partnership based on respect and love. I want to build something with you: a home, a family, a future." He paused, his heart pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Abigail sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across her face, illuminating her features with a joy that took Cooper's breath away. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Cooper Calloway, I will marry you." Cooper pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise he felt. When they finally separated, both breathless and laughing, Cooper reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "It was my mother's," he explained, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone special." Abigail's eyes filled with tears as Cooper slid the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she said, admiring how it caught the fading sunlight. They were still sitting on the porch, making plans for their future, when they heard the approach of horses. Cooper stood quickly, instinctively placing himself between Abigail and whatever was coming, 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property. Cooper recognized Sheriff Miller immediately. The other 2 were Harold Weston and his hired gun, a notorious troublemaker named Silas Reed. "Stay here," Cooper told Abigail, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Cooper, no," Abigail protested, grabbing his arm. "Let me face them. This is my fight, too." After a moment's hesitation, Cooper nodded. "Together, then." They stood side by side on the porch as the riders approached. Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable, while Weston's face was flushed with anger. Silas Reed wore the cold, calculating expression of a man who enjoyed violence. "Cooper Calloway," Sheriff Miller called as they reined in their horses. "We've come for Miss Kendrick." "She's not going anywhere, Tom," Cooper replied evenly, his rifle held casually but ready. Harold Weston pushed his horse forward. "You've been harboring my fiancée for months, Calloway." "That's kidnapping." "I am not your fiancée," Abigail said firmly, stepping forward. "I never agreed to marry you, Mr. Weston, and you know it." Weston's face darkened. "You disappeared during a blizzard. This man took advantage of your vulnerable state. You're confused, Abigail." "The only one confused here is you," Cooper countered. "And soon the whole town will know why. Judge Mason's investigation into your financial dealings is nearly complete." The color drained from Weston's face. "What investigation?" Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "That's why I'm really here, Weston. Judge Mason sent me to bring you back to town to answer some questions about the school mortgage." "This is absurd," Weston spluttered. "You can't believe the accusations of a kidnapper and a woman who abandoned her responsibilities." "I didn't abandon anything," Abigail said, her voice strong and clear. "I fled because you threatened to destroy my career if I didn't marry you. You abused your position on the school board and manipulated the town's finances for years. It's over, Mr. Weston." Weston's eyes darted between them, calculation replacing shock. Then, with a subtle nod to Silas Reed, he urged his horse backward. Cooper noticed the movement too late. Reed's hand flashed to his holster, drawing his pistol with practiced speed. Cooper raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from the sheriff's gun. Silas Reed slumped in his saddle, his unfired pistol falling to the ground. Sheriff Miller held his smoking gun steady, now aimed at Harold Weston. "That's enough," Miller said firmly. "Harold Weston, you're under arrest for financial fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder." Weston's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Miller. All of you will." The sheriff dismounted, retrieving handcuffs from his saddlebag. "Save it for the judge, Weston." As Sheriff Miller secured the banker, Cooper kept his rifle trained on the 2 men, unwilling to take chances until they were safely restrained. "Miss Kendrick," the sheriff said once Weston was handcuffed, "I owe you an apology. We should have taken your concerns more seriously." Abigail nodded, accepting his words. "I'd like to return to town with you, Sheriff. It's time I spoke to the school board directly." Cooper looked at her sharply. "Abigail, I need to do this," she said, meeting his gaze with determination. "Not just for myself, but for the children and the town." Understanding dawned in Cooper's eyes. This was the independence she'd sought, not isolation, but the strength to stand up for herself and what she believed in. "I'll come with you," he said simply. The ride to Blackwater Ridge the next morning was tense but uneventful. Weston rode in silence, his wrists bound, while Silas Reed followed behind, his arm bandaged where the sheriff's bullet had grazed him. Sheriff Miller had deputized Cooper for the journey, giving him the authority to help guard the prisoners. Abigail rode beside Cooper, her head held high despite the stares they received as they entered town. News traveled quickly, and by the time they reached the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Judge Mason met them on the steps, his stern countenance softening when he saw Abigail. "Miss Kendrick, I'm relieved to see you safe. Mr. Forrester has been most concerned for your welfare." "Thank you, Your Honor," Abigail replied. "I'm ready to provide testimony about Mr. Weston's actions." The events that followed moved swiftly. Harold Weston was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, with Abigail's testimony about his threats adding extortion to the list. The school board, horrified by the extent of Weston's deception, immediately reinstated Abigail as teacher with their sincere apologies. By evening, Cooper and Abigail found themselves at the town's small hotel, each with a separate room, propriety suddenly important now that they were back in civilization. "Will you stay in town now?" Cooper asked as they sat in the hotel's quiet dining room. "Return to teaching." Abigail reached across the table, taking his hand. "I want to finish the school term," she said. "The children deserve that much, but after that—" She glanced down at the ring on her finger, then back up at Cooper with a smile. "After that, I believe I have a ranch to help run and a wedding to plan." Relief washed over Cooper's features. "I wasn't sure if being back here might change your mind. Your life in town, your independence—" "Cooper," Abigail interrupted gently. "What I found with you isn't a sacrifice of my independence. It's a partnership. You respected me, listened to me, treated me as an equal. That's more freedom than I ever had here in town." Cooper raised her hand to his lips, kissing her fingers. "2 months till the term ends," he mused. "Seems a long time to wait." "Not so very long," Abigail countered with a mischievous smile. "Just enough time to prepare the ranch for a bride and for me to teach my students everything they need to know before summer." True to her word, Abigail taught with renewed passion for the remainder of the school term. The children were overjoyed to have her back, and the parents, now understanding the circumstances of her disappearance, were supportive and grateful. Cooper returned to his ranch during the week, but rode into town every weekend to see her. During those weeks apart, Cooper threw himself into preparing the ranch for Abigail's arrival as his wife. He expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living space. He built new furniture, a dressing table for Abigail, bookshelves for her collection, a larger dining table where they could share meals and eventually, he hoped, seat children of their own. Harold Weston's trial was swift and decisive. With overwhelming evidence of his financial misdeeds and multiple witnesses to his threats against Abigail, he was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. His assets were liquidated to repay those he had defrauded, including the school board, who now owned the schoolhouse outright. On the last day of the school term, Cooper arrived in Blackwater Ridge driving a wagon rather than riding renegade. The classroom was empty when he entered, save for Abigail, who was carefully packing the last of her teaching materials. "Ready?" Cooper asked softly from the doorway. Abigail turned, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "More than ready," she replied, crossing the room to greet him with a kiss. "I've said my goodbyes to the children. Mrs. Hanson has agreed to take over teaching next term." Cooper took the box from her hands, setting it on a nearby desk before pulling her into his arms. "I've missed you," he murmured against her hair. "And I you," Abigail replied, leaning back to look up at him. "But we won't have to be apart anymore." They were married the following Saturday in Blackwater Ridge's small church. The town turned out in force, the same people who had once whispered about Abigail's disappearance now celebrating her happiness. Sheriff Miller stood as Cooper's best man, while Daniel Forrester's wife served as Abigail's matron of honor. As they exchanged vows, Cooper found himself captivated by the same extraordinary eyes that had opened to meet his that day in his cabin. Now, instead of confusion, they held love and certainty. I, Cooper James Calloway, take you, Abigail Marie Kendrick, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice strong and clear. I promise to cherish and respect you, to provide for and protect you, to be your partner in all things, for as long as we both shall live. Abigail's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated her own vows, her voice steady despite her emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cooper kissed her with a tenderness that belied the passion he felt, mindful of their audience but unable to completely hide his joy. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with music and dancing in the town hall. As evening fell, Cooper and Abigail bid farewell to their guests and climbed into their wagon for the journey home to their home. The 10-mile trip to the ranch passed quickly, filled with conversation and laughter and occasional comfortable silences. When they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Cooper stopped the wagon. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below where the cabin stood, lamplight already glowing in the windows thanks to his neighbor who had prepared the house for their return. "It's not grand, but it's perfect," Abigail finished for him, squeezing his hand. "It's where I found myself and you." Cooper kissed her then, a kiss full of promise for their future. When they separated, he clicked to the horses and guided the wagon down the slope toward home. At the cabin door, Cooper surprised Abigail by lifting her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, Abigail gasped. The cabin was transformed not just with the structural changes Cooper had made, but with dozens of wildflowers arranged in jars and vases throughout the space. A fire crackled welcomingly in the hearth, and the table was set for a simple supper. "When did you do all this?" Abigail asked, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Had some help from the neighbor's wife," Cooper admitted, watching her reaction with pleasure. "Do you like it?" In answer, Abigail threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with an abandon that made his heart race. "It's beautiful," she whispered against his lips, "but not nearly as beautiful as what I feel for you." Later that night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Cooper traced gentle patterns on Abigail's bare shoulder, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I still can't believe how lucky I was," he murmured, "finding you that day in the snow." Abigail lifted her head from his chest to look at him. "I used to think it was just chance that you happened to be riding by when I collapsed, but now I think perhaps it was something more. Fate or providence." Cooper smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Either way, I'm grateful. For those 10 miles in the snow, for the storm that kept us together, for every moment since." "As am I," Abigail whispered, settling back against him, "and for every moment yet to come." 1 year later, Cooper stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Abigail hung laundry in the spring sunshine. Her belly was rounded with their first child, due in just 2 months' time. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Cooper's practical knowledge, combined with Abigail's organizational skills and business acumen, had allowed them to increase the herd and improve the property. Twice a week, Abigail still rode into Blackwater Ridge to tutor children whose parents wanted additional education. The money she earned was being saved for their child's future. Cooper had built a nursery adjoining their bedroom, carefully crafting a cradle from wood harvested on their own land. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Abigail called, noticing his thoughtful expression. Cooper crossed the yard to help her with the last of the laundry. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, placing a hand on her stomach and feeling their child kick in response. "And thinking about how different life would be if I'd taken another trail that day." Abigail leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "But you didn't. You found me." "I'll always find you," Cooper promised, echoing the words he'd spoken that night during the storm. In this life, and whatever comes after. As they stood together in the Wyoming sunshine, surrounded by the home and life they'd built together, Cooper Calloway knew with absolute certainty that those 10 miles through the snow had been the most important journey of his life, not because of the distance traveled, but because they had led him to the love he found in Abigail's extraordinary eyes.